everybody, so today we're finally going to be reading The Consequences of Imagination's Fear. I am so excited to get back on this one because this one is a whole freaking roller coaster. And it is super duper looper hard to recap on though. So for everybody's sanity, I will not be doing the recap because of how long it was. It took me about like almost more than probably 5 minutes for me to recap on just one chapter, and for you guys not to suffer that or go through what I had to go through, we're just not going to recap it. If you want to know about the story, like a recap quote unquote of the story, just go ahead and watch the video. It will be in the up right corner for you guys, so just go ahead, press it, watch the video before you watch this one, for not only my sanity but for yours as well. So thank you. Thank you guys. No, I'm sorry. Here's some of the warnings. For the warnings going into this story, there will be mentions, a lot of mentions of memory erasing, black goo-like mold, supernatural being or beings, hidden dark meanings. Y'all will understand why I'll get more into the story. Multiple realities and existences, and also questioning your reality. Details of messing with brains, and I mean literally. A lot of body anatomy and questionable like things reasonably. Because if we remember, Wally is in our world and we don't even know how he's even alive. Anyways, illusions. A lot of illusions or seemingly illusions. It's about to get crazy up in here, y'all, so prepare yourselves. Y'all have been warned. Chapter 15 of Stitches and Syrup. Summary. Early bird gets the worm, or so the fable goes. Where do the birds come from? From the worm's perspective? What is a bird? And who is the worm? Alright. A lot of hidden messages right here. A lot of hidden messages. And the author says there's going to be some stronger horror themes. So, period. I'm so excited, guys. But a lot of whole things that we're going to find out at the end of this chapter. Don't worry. Everything was dark. Oh, sorry. My paper scared me. Okay. Everything was dark. Wally's hands spluttered from your view, his voice distorting into a booming, echoing static. The outline of light between his fingers melted from a hopeful orange to a metallic brown, into charcoal before fading altogether. The sensation of his hands, smooth and soft and solid, turned prickling until it too vanished, leaving you alone once more. The last of his message murmured in your mind as you peered into your new surroundings. Gone was the apartment of dust, now replaced with a suffocating gloom. The darkness was back, denser, tangible, hanging low and heavy. It was so thick you could breathe it in and taste the sour mildew of it, the musty of decay. It swamped your lungs, taking refuge in the inner lining of your organs, taking root within you. It lasted the blink of an eye. The ceiling above was a bubbling, oozing sky of shadows, a pulsing mass of sinew that clung tight, a spiraling network of inky tendrils that dug and shifted and grew. Roots of absence germinated into flowering stems, air clogged with its spores, artificial fog drowning the last remaining light. Alive yet not, consuming and starving, a paradoxical crime of a nature. It dribbled down the walls, more tendrils snaking down and leaving a coating of ebony sludge. It gnawed on the last of the pigment left in the environment, sharp and steady. It drained free of all color, replacing them with a sea of murky grays that overlapped each other. fighting for dominance in the ever-darkening surroundings. Seeing anything was a struggle, for the only thing clear in your vision was the stark, anomalous presence of it. With a wet, choked sound, a chunk hit the ground by your foot. A chunk hit the ground by your foot, splattering into a spreading, pulsing growth. The droplets that hit your foot stung, phantom acid eating through your skin, burning rods jabbed in. It threatened to multiply as another chunk fell, oozing dreads of pitch-black flesh stretching out and connecting to the other falling globs, a web sprouting between them. You found yourself unable to move, the tendrils hanging in the air, connecting as more spores flooded the air, darkening as your vision further. The masses now pooled on the ground were slowly reaching out to you. The texture of molasses? I'm going to just say molasses even though I said it wrong. Your heart was beating at a rabbit's pace. A trembling bird trapped in a cage, thrown down a pit. The dying taste of freedom. Skin clammy, damp with sweat and covered in goosebumps. Your mouth was painfully dry. Tongue stuck to your teeth. Your gums ached, tasting of bitter aluminum. You could feel its intentions in the very air. Feel just how pulsing ink aimed for you, extended towards you, how it fought to clamber onto your skin, into your pores, into your very body, how it thrilled to devour you, to make your body rot in a very sludge way. To make your body rot in the very sludge you would be birthed into. Forced ellipse of the self. Reverse. Yeah, I think. I can't say it, I'm sorry. In its need to control, to be all, to become. It foundered. It struggled to find its prey, to find you. Still, you felt like you were drowning. Even if the dripping gunk couldn't find you. Not yet. Not yet. You dared hope it wouldn't find you, but that didn't mean it wouldn't try. The hunt wouldn't be sacrificed for the miserable concept of pride nor mercy, for it did not care for such things. Its only priority was to consume what it saw, to envelop what it deemed no longer needed, no longer required, no longer worthy of being. You could taste the conviction. You could taste the resolve. It existed for a purpose, and it would fulfill that purpose. Despite the new world it was in, despite the disadvantage of a genuine reality, it would thrive purely because it deemed it right to do so. Created without expiration, it was incapable of understanding the concept of failure. More and more chunks fell off from the ceiling, almost reminding you of brains. Their membranes bursting into indistinguishable pulsating puddles, splattered droplets staying afloat in the air. Rather than falling, they popped once again, smaller and smaller into the fog of spores already present, ready to spread, ready to infect. The darkness grew ever more oppressive. It only lasted a second. Frozen, you watched as it drew ever closer. The concepts of walls and ceilings and soon floors too merely were a distant memory. For now, they were replaced entirely with it. That was, until it wasn't. Two eyes blinked open like twin mouths curling wide. The pupils were tiny, jittery, things dashing frantically. The whites of them glowing, pupils flushed pale with the only light that existed. The light you welcomed as much as you cursed. You swallowed down the concoction of panic and relief lodged in your throat, mouth too dry to call out, air too dense with spores to dare speak. The eyes were familiar in an acrid haunting way. Unlike the ones that made that made home in your skin. They didn't burn when they spotted you. It was more of an ache, a feeling akin to that after stretching. Odd and uncomfortable, but satisfying in the knowledge that it was for good. That purpose was rooted in something good, or at least good for you in this very moment. You hoped. You blinked. The eyes were twice as large, inches away from your face, trembling pupils expanding as they scanned you over. Another chunk of ooze splattered by your feet, causing the eyes to wrinkle, glaring down at the inky mass. The air chilled, the skeletal hand of fear rushing down your spine as you dared look down, dared witness what you shouldn't. The mess that eyes stared at began to fold itself into itself. The sickening pulsing speeding up, faster and faster, until the quivering became vibrating. It shrunk, droplets dripping free as it crumbled into itself over and over, losing mass. The eyes narrowed further, the goobel seemingly blurry and bulging as it popped into nothing. Pure oblivion. The eyes proceeded to apply that treatment to the inky sinew around you, glaring as they feasted on pure shadows, steadily clearing the surroundings into something you could see, into somewhere you could breathe. In the presence above loomed, an ominous threat that appeared to slither through the newly formed cracks in the ceiling, retreating into wherever it came from. Withering and screeching, it demanded your focus even as the eyes tore it apart, destroyed its mini-cry of being in a corporeal dimension. It only lasted a second. You flinched when the eyes turned towards you, impossibly large and unreadable. The pupils were no longer present, replaced by holes burgeoning into a darkness even deeper than the oozing shadows. Twin black holes. They sang to you, calling out, eager to be acknowledged, to be seen in your eyes. Your stomach churned as they drew in closer, begging for your recognition, for your attention. Beyond those pits, beyond the sea of nothing, you saw light. You saw colors. You saw home. You saw safety. You let yourself fall in. With a sigh, you felt yourself be washed away in the light pouring from the eyes, allowing yourself to give into their pull. The room howled fury and pain as the eyes dragged you free, scrubbing away the leftover gloom, covering your eyes with the promise of blissful ignorance. You felt it scour your mind, a warm, gentle hand caressing your mind as it plucked out the fear, carefully pruning the roots of desolation out, making sure to get all it could reach. It was not unpleasant, almost akin to a mental hug, a heated blanket wrapped around your mind's shoulders. Comforting if it hadn't been so invasive, welcomed even if there hadn't been a bell in your head ringing out wrong, wrong, wrong. Chimes of restlessness, the instinctual need to escape into a place without the intrusion of others. It made your stomach clench tight and your shoulders hunch up, the desire to roll into a protective ball igniting. And yet, despite that, you still succumbed to the mental reprieve, not fighting it as you lost yourself within it, bathed in its light, a light that continued to grow brighter and brighter, almost painful in its glory. The last thing you saw was a brief glimpse of the apartment, between the dripping shadows and burning lights, normal colors now, dull compared to the brightness you've adapted to. There was dust and grime coating everywhere. The potted plant you'd forgotten about was dying, little leaves turning a wrinkled yellow. The carpet had a spill you didn't recognize, some tawny substance making itself at home. Wires hung from the ceiling, jostling small chunks of insulation falling through and onto the ground below. Nowhere was spared, but you barely had time to process it. It only last I only lasted the blink of an eye, but to you, it had lasted forever. Wally was in the kitchen. You could tell from the humming drifting over to where you were. It was a tune you vaguely recognized, important in a way that you couldn't remember, though the notes were still staggered and halting. The pitch varies low and off key. It was warming, a friendly sign of cohabitation, a small declaration of trust, a quiet way of announcing one's presence, in a way that didn't scream, "Pay me attention." Rather, it politely suggested mutual existence, and one that brought the promise of no harm, loud enough that you knew who it was without being so loud when it became yelling. And with how your head was aching, a strong, throbbing pain behind your eyes, it was welcomed. With the humming came the clatter of metal and muffled rummaging, waiting. You could even make out the sound of fingers tapping on the counter, the clack of dress shoes shifting on the tile. Though the tile sounded off, if that was indeed the origin of the noise. Too high-pitched, almost like jingling. You listened intently, trying to think of what else it could be. It sounded like the tile had been broken. How could that have happened? A distraction came in the form of a sudden sizzling. Heated metal meeting something cool. Normally, that sound wouldn't be any more notable than the sound of tapping, but it came with the knowledge of something you didn't like, but not out of fear or anger. Instead, you felt worried. You paused, concern bubbling up in your chest, overtaking your headache. It started up again, the harsh sizzling paired with splattering, the grating sound of metal against metal. Wally was made out of fleece, wasn't he? Or a similar material to that? You weren't entirely sure. His anatomy was different from yours, at the very least. Though his fingers were wrong, his face too strange to pass as fully human, he was still a person. A person constructed out of a fusion of felt and flesh. A person that was presumably that could get hurt. That was what put you on the edge. He was new to your world. And though you knew his was similar to yours, you didn't know how similar. Did he cook there? Or was that more akin to a hobby in his world, not required for simple fun? Did he understand safety when it came to using a stove? As that was the sound, that's what it sounded like he was doing. Or was he obvious to the fact that it could, if given the chance, severely injure a person? You hadn't had the faintest clue what he was made out of. Was his inside filled with stuffing? Or did he have a stomach and heart, guts, and lungs? Was there blood pumping through his veins, or was his bones a skeletal structure of metal and wires? You weren't entirely sure if he even had teeth, let alone a need to eat. But it didn't really matter if he could get hurt. Raking through the snippets of memories you had, wordless conversations and monotone laughter, you struggled to remember what you needed to know. Did Wally ever explain the difference between you and him? Did he explain how he was? You knew you both talked. You knew he told you some things, but none of them actually explained him. What was he? Why was he? Did he have any special needs that differ from your human ones? Did he understand what human needs were? All you knew was that he existed now, as impossible as that was, and that it had something to do with the power of thought. A silly notion, truly. Wait. It was one he was adamant to defend. If he was here because you thought of him. The sizzling sound reared up again, angrier, louder. You struggled between rushing to check for injuries and waiting. Because Wally wasn't a fool, and often knew more than he let on. On one hand, the sizzling could be him burning, felt a flame inside spilling out into the fire, crackling into cooking. Another finger gone, withering into a useless string, singed into ashes. Fleece turned it to charcoal. Would you find blood? You wondered. Cotton, perhaps? Would you find meat, red and browning? Cartilage and bones, sinew and tendons, all melting onto a platter? The paranoia grew too much. Images of injuries flashing through your mind's eye. Staggering to your feet, you made your way over to the kitchen. The walk there was familiar. A sense of déjà vu washing over your weary soul, leaving panic in your footsteps. If he was hurt, wouldn't he be able to make a noise? Yell? Shout? Scream? You knew Wally could scream. Though you never wanted to hear it again. You didn't want to remember it. You didn't want to ever even think about it. Yet you remember that ear-piercing noise rushing from your phone, distorted with static and horrible high-pitched ringing. What was he trying to stop by making you forget? Surely, now that he had a body, regardless of how unknown his physical makeup was, he would understand pain. He would try to get your attention for help. Surely he'd trust you enough to help. Would you trust him if you were in his shoes? Maybe you would. No, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd disappear back into the phone where he came from, crawling through an impossible portal to weave himself back together, replacing charred fabric with an unmarred new, replacing the melted stuffing with more. If he had organs now, would he still have them there? It seemed easier, almost, to consider the first aid of a living puppet. If skin was no more than human-made felt, though in their world it may not be made at all, was there a level of horror, you wondered, for Wally being here, knowing that what he's made of, his literal flesh, his skin, could be bought at a store, that they sold it to anyone without the respect that it was the makings of life? Then could be as simple as stitching new in place of the old? Would stitches be permanent to them, or would they need to eventually leave, similar to your own? Would the fleece recognize new fleece and meld into one? Would it leave a gradient, a scar, blotchy patterns? Depending on the pain, would such a procedure be equivalent to human tattooing? Would it be a body horror concept birthed into being? A world where spools of skin can be bought and replaced, where your organs were made of the very thing you slept on? It was, to a lesser extent, akin to the gingerbread conundrum. If a gingerbread person stood in a home of the same, they would be made of the house or the home made of flesh. Obviously, in that scenario, the inanimate nature of each component makes the inherent horror of the concept bland, lifeless. For the answer remains the same regardless of personal belief. They are both made for the purpose of being consumed. Wally, though, was made as a puppet. His purpose adaptable to whatever role he was given, to entertain, to exist, have meaning placed upon him. In his world, neither was built of fleece, at least you didn't think so. Though home was considered alive, in their world, you didn't know to what degree. Therefore, the difference between the gingerbread conundrum and Wally's situation was simple. It was the sentience, the sapness that changed the nature of the question, because there was perspective, because there was subjective experience. Because he, regardless of what he was built to be, was alive. He spoke, he thought, he had opinions and beliefs. He had a life that he owned and a life that he lived, freed from the constraints that he would have faced as a mere byproduct of his existence. He was his own person. now within your world, dimension, plane of existence, conscious interpretation of things unknown, and would remain so, or at the very least, he showed no signs of wanting to leave. He never showed signs of wanting to leave. His drive to exist here scared you. You shuddered, nausea returning as Wally came into view. The train of thought hit a wall, crumbling into itself when your eyes landed on his figure. Still as tall as you, still as yellow, still as real. Your breathing evened out, though your heart kept skipping. The sight was growing less jarring, his presence less mind-boggling, almost natural, if you managed to ignore the impossibility of it. Almost natural. You thought and thought and thought. What was it like to be in his shoes? What was it like to go beyond the limitations of one's original reality? He wasn't burning. You wondered if he understood the magnitude of his actions, if he understood, if he even knew. He wasn't injured. Why would he be? There was more going on. There was more at play. You could feel it in the air. You could see the oil dripping from the ceiling. He didn't even look concerned. Why were you so sure something bad was going to happen? Why did you picture him burning? He stood by the stove facing away from you. A square bowl of what you assumed was pancake mix left on the counter. A comically large cherry red spatula on the counter beside it. And what you summarized must be something he brought over because you couldn't imagine using such a thing, let alone manufacturers even creating it in the first place. Star-shaped pan, he had various cookie cutouts inside, batter stuffed inside them. There were all sorts of shapes, squares and stretched diamonds, stars and triangles. There was even a far too thick cube of batter sitting by the stove, lightly oozing as it jiggled. To your surprise, he managed to fit in more than you would have expected within the star-shaped pan. He was even wearing your apron, a dark blue and purple print with, in bold white cursive, a simple message, hug the chef. You watched him as he worked, Wally engrossed in the cooking. He poked one of the forming pancakes with a fork, humming as it turned out clean. Reaching in, he pulled out his metal cookie cutters with his bare hands. Pulling them free and setting them aside, he flipped them over with the spatula, the star-shaped pan making it more difficult for him to do so. "What are you doing?" you asked, voice filled with mirth. "Oh, good, you're up, my dear friend. You gave me quite a scare, you did, fainting all of a sudden like that." You wrinkled your nose at the endearment. It was fun, but also partially worrisome. Was Wally perhaps getting too buddy-buddy with you too fast? Not that it was necessarily a bad thing, as you much rather him a demon, a person, a man, a puppet fast smile of humanity be kind towards you, but it was overwhelming, stifling at times. Was Wally your friend only because you were the only one that interacted with him? Maybe your distress was because you took much longer to form genuine friendships with people. After all who knew you, how long they'd stick around. Friends made at school, at work, or wherever you ended up visiting. They were all nice, pleasant to know, and it was nice that you knew someone during those moments. But you weren't sure who was your friend because they genuinely wanted to be, and who was your friend out for the sake of convenience. It was a comforting thought that he'd be a friendly face even when you were unsure of your own place in the world. You thought and thought and thought, and they weren't just limited to your blooming friendship with the puppet. You couldn't stop thinking, now that you knew how. You knew he liked games and art, but how much was that him actually sharing his interest? How much was him bored? How much was him bored interacting with the only person he could? How much of it was a ruse to keep you distracted and focused on him? That was not what you were afraid of. That was what you were afraid of, ultimately. That if he was only here because of the power of thoughts. Did he only care as long as you could give him life? Was that what this was? You must be starving. His voice was cheery as he spun in place, stopping once he was directly facing you, interrupting your very thoughts. His eyes were wide as they locked onto you, smile strained. His cheeks were flushed from the heat of the stove. Small droplets of batter splattered onto the apron. Without looking away from you, he slid the pancakes onto a notably square plate, turning off the stove with a click. So, I made these specially for you, neighbor, so I hope you like them. You started a response, a pang of pain shooting through your head like it had just been shaken. Your thoughts got jumbled up, entangled without any clear end. It was fruitless to remember what you were thinking. He wasn't hurt, so what were you so concerned about? Had you been doing something? Or just checking on him? You couldn't remember. The fog was returning, and you were getting lost within it. You managed your tempo with closed eyes, focusing on what it was. The train of thought you were boarded on had fallen off the tracks, where railway metal splintered and frayed, cataboose blown open, coal spilling free. Mentally, you struggled within the cabin, completely trapped with the doors welded shut, windows warped into panels of wood. The remaining thoughts flickered, represented as a small chain-operated light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Shadows fell upon the last remains of the windows as large hands carefully set the cabin cart down on another track. A safer track. A track without direction. A track that was monitored. Your thoughts were being monitored. You looked down at the pancakes, amused by the color assortment. Not only were they all sorts of shapes, but Wally found food dye and mixed them in, making red and pale blue, strawberry pink, and a particularly bright green. The star was neon yellow. The stretched diamonds, the deepest of hues, mimicking real-world rubies and sapphires, though some were burnt at the edges. The food coloring unable to hide the dark oak tone. The pancakes themselves taller and a bit more solid than what you'd had in the past. Overall, it was pretty cute, and the smell was lovely. The scent of freshly cooked pancakes making the apartment feel more lively. You thanked him, complimenting his skills as he began explaining his process of getting them all in the right shapes. He was more passionate than you thought he'd be. That was, until Wally explained that to him. Creative cooking was like another art form. You tried to ignore the chiming sound when he was cleaning up, glass against ceramic. But the worry of before clawed free, and you felt the overwhelming need to know the cause. Had he broken something? Or was simply too embarrassed to say so? Was it more serious? You pushed the plate to the side and leaned over the counter, peeking over to the floor. He stepped in the way, playfully tutting as he did so. Shouldn't you eat while your food is still hot? I'll clean up here, neighbor. Trust me. You couldn't stop yourself. What's in the kitchen? Just these fabulous pancakes I made for you. Now why don't you sit down and eat them? You shouldn't waste your food, you know. Excuse me. You shouldn't waste food, you know. You narrowed your eyes and waited, body tense. Neither of you moved. Despite Wally's claims of cleaning, he remained passively watching you, guarding his new secret. After a few minutes of false peace, you lunged over the counter, hands gripping onto the edge to pull yourself over, determined to see. The plan almost worked. As you were stopped by his hand in your face, blocking your view, you heard him snicker, slow and monotone. You must really work on your table manners, friend. After all, doesn't the food go on the table, not the people? His hands was surprisingly warm, and the sort of softness that toed the line between felt and satin. You could smell the pancake batter wafting off, a light dusting of flour being smeared on your nose when you tried pulling yourself over. Unfortunately for you, he didn't budge. Despite the awkward angle, he was solid. Ever so carefully, he adjusted his hand and pushed your face back. Your attempt to see the kitchen floor successfully thwarted. You sighed and retreated, feeling akin to a cat who was stopped from pushing a glass off the edge of a table. He patted your head too, insult to injury. Though you knew it was in good nature, you noticed that he was very careful whenever you did have to physically interact. The pauses in his speech drawing out even more, and he had a tendency to stare at the hand you touched, but only when he thought you didn't notice. You deflated. It was hard to be upset with him, not during these domestic moments. It was hard, but not impossible. You knew now. You knew that he was the one behind it. Because the fog was back, a thick, murky gray obscuring your thoughts, limiting access to your mind. You could recognize now the very point when it begins. Steam turned to a fog, dust into sand. It made your movements sluggish, your eyes unwillingly trailing. You could feel now the careful hand of distortion within your mind, rewriting your memories, your subjectivity. Your subjectivity. This wasn't the first time he's made you forget. You were restless, an animal trapped within a cage too small. Even with the distractions, Wally couldn't stop you from thinking. You thought and thought and thought, and now began thinking even with the fog mangling them. From board games to riddle-like answers. For a supposed host of a children's television show, Wally was awfully vague with explaining himself. Me. I'm not the one that, without permission, decided to move into my apartment. You crossed your arms. The frustration you felt was a building one. A pot left to simmer in the background, each eluding action another ingredient. Wally froze, mouth agape and pupils expanded. His eyes glittered with something that appeared horribly like hope, making you question your words. You didn't understand. It was hard. With whatever social language barrier existed between you two. It was either that or Wally purposely misinterpreting things, which was both humorous and annoying, and something you were beginning to think that he did to ignore what he didn't want to acknowledge. But you knew the conversation had changed courses, effectively derailing you once more. Oh, friend, I'm so thrilled I can move in. Thank you so much. I'm ever so grateful. Wally, that's not... We should have a party. Wait, or maybe a picnic. Do you like picnics? We could have apples and pies, and it'll be so much fun, don't you think? He rushed around the counter, one arm hovering over your shoulders as he guided you towards the table. He placed your breakfast. Honestly, you didn't know what that meal was. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, a snack? It was possible that this was the only thing he knew how to cook. Down and pulled out. That's kind of hilarious. Down and pulled out your seat, encouraging you to sit down, notably facing away from the kitchen. He stood by your side, rocking on his heels as he fox-clapped his hands, eyes flickering between you and the pancakes. Please eat up. I read that humans need to do this to stay all strong and healthy, and I don't want you falling apart on me, neighbor. Effectively, you were trapped. Your head spun too much to react. The fog more like a solid wall than mist you could see through. The pancakes smelled delightful, though, and you figured that you can continue the discussion when you were less incapacitated. But you weren't also the sort of person to give up right away. Not if you knew you'd forget this battle if you didn't. So you didn't give up. Not entirely. Not yet. Your stomach growled. The pancakes looked increasingly more tempting, though there was a star missing. One that you clearly remember because of how obnoxiously neon it was. Strange. It was also strange that whenever you tried to look over your shoulder, Wally would end up blocking your vision, whether it be stretching out the apron or leaning to the side, he refused to let you see. You couldn't even ask, because he'd cut you off with another fun idea of what neighborly fun you both could have now that he officially lived here. Because apparently you couldn't tell him that wasn't what you meant. What was in the kitchen? You tried, of course, but he wouldn't get it. At first he acted hurt, then laughed it off as a joke, calling you a silly little prankster. Then he'd bug you about the pancakes, encouraging you to eat them, poking the arm you held the fork with and pretending to turn it on like a machine, asking himself out loud why it wasn't working. Finally, he went with playful ignorance, which would only be playful if you knew that he knew. And Wally, of course, didn't share what he knew. It was almost impressive how good he was at dodging responsibility. As you ate, you noticed small chunks of the pancakes missing. It didn't happen often, but it was noticeable enough that you wondered if you were now forgetting chunks of time. If the missing parts were what you already ate and you simply couldn't remember. You hated that thought. How much could you forget of what you remember, or what did you remember was real? You stuffed the last of the pancakes in your mouth, finally feeling the sudden surge of hunger fade away. The pancakes were mediocre. They weren't the best you had. That honor went to Rosie and her secret family recipe that she refused to share. But they were far from bad, bordering on bland, despite the kaleidoscopic coloring, though in your current state you found them delightful. Not that you told him that. Naturally, you wanted to, but not today. But today wasn't a day for pleasantries. You did feel bad, but it was worse knowing that Wally still wouldn't trust you. He was hiding something. He wasn't all what he claimed to be. As soon as you set the fork down, he descended, dragging the plate and cutlery away into the kitchen. That left you without an excuse to follow him, thwarting yet another attempt before you could even execute it. So you changed tactics, deciding to lower yourself to his playing field. If he picked deniability at his shield, manipulation as his weapon, you'd strike back with the ultimate weapon. Unwavering and relentless badgering. Wally? He hummed a response. His retreat into the kitchen being nothing more than him stretching out to place the plate onto the kitchen counter. A shame, because it gave you no chance to even peek behind. You had a plan, though. In childish amusement, bundled in your chest as you steeled yourself, getting ready to harness the power of being annoying. Can I see the kitchen? Why don't we stay in here for a little bit, neighbor? Can I see the kitchen? Isn't it a lovely... What's in the kitchen? You eternally cheered when you heard his fingers begin tapping. While you weren't one for making people uncomfortable, this was for a good cause. Wally merely sighed and said nothing, keeping his laid-back charade as he seemingly caught wind of your scheme. You could feel his gaze burn, and you struggled to imagine him without his smile, though you've seen him in emotional states before. This time was different. This was you provoking a reaction rather than unfortunate circumstances playing out. You wondered if he knew how not to smile. You wondered if he wanted to know. Can I see the kitchen now? You asked again, peering up at him with the best hopeful expression you could produce. Again and again, over and over, you asked, poking his arm while he continued to stay mute. You could see his smile falter, eyes lidded and pupils small as he gazed down at you, his hands clenching fistfuls of the apron as you continued to poke him, successfully wearing him down. Eventually, he stepped back, overwhelmed by the minimal contact. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm. You should really rest today, neighbor. You changed gears. It was time to bring out the big guns. If you couldn't see the kitchen, then there was an obvious, more important place he was keeping hidden from you. And though the fog was thick, you were aware enough to notice the unnatural light. Now, how the only sound came from you or Wally, how nothing ever seemed to change. You finally noticed that there was an outside. You finally noticed that there was a way to leave. Why hadn't you seen that before? How long have you been here? How long since the front door was a door and not in your mind? A painted section of wall, a mere decoration. Of course, the handle was chewed apart. The wreath that you hung filled with fake birds was missing, and a new chain link lock added. Nevertheless, it was a door, and it was a door you could leave through. You switched gears, deciding to try your hand at bargaining. Either you show me what's in the kitchen, or I go outside. The reaction was immediate. Wally's hands clenching the apron tight, fistfuls of material straining between his palms, and you swore you heard a faint ripping noise. His foot tapping became erratic, his breathing bouncing between halting, forgotten, and an odd gasping noise. He left his self-designed spot near you to check out the door, glaring at it. The air was cold. When did you notice it? What? When did you realize that the door was there? He unlocked and relocked the door, fiddling, pushing it against to make sure it was fully sealed. It flickered in your view, the edges blurring as it began to look more and more like a section of the wall instead, the locks growing a bright molten yellow. You couldn't see the kitchen from here, but you've long since abandoned that goal. It's a front door, Wally. Obviously my apartment would have one. Why would I? No, you shouldn't remember that. He punched roughly where his nose would be inside, long and labored. Trust me, you don't want to know more. I've been working so hard and you keep on trying to ruin my work. Could you just stop doing that, friend? I'm keeping you safe here. You didn't dignify him with an answer. A whirlwind of emotions thrashed within your chest, banging and knocking, threatening to spill. Confusion and frustration, concern and deep-rooted sense of betrayal. Because this was the confirmation you never wanted. Because you couldn't deny it any longer. There really was more behind Wally's actions than you were aware of, and it was confirmation that he was doing something. Sure, you had suspected that he was messing with your memories, but this meant that it was much, much more. It wasn't just the memories. It didn't stop at just the memories. He was influencing more than just that, and you had no idea where the limits of his power, his control started and ended. You didn't know what was real. It didn't just limit itself to that. The discovery of uncovered a truth that you denied for the sake of your sanity, because it meant that the memory issues, the fog and headaches and endless confusion, it was planned and it was maintained. Each new burst of fog akin to maintenance to a machine instead of a regrettable action, instead of a helpless inevitability. It meant that your very consciousness was more fractured than you thought, and that it wasn't even yours. Your mind wasn't your own. Shared ownership, unsigned contract without legible terms or regulations. You were strapped within, and the other, Wally, was determined to keep you there. All your tricks already known, all your fears already recognized, your dreams, ambitions, anxieties, the theories too, they were all known to him. That was. If Wally was the person controlling it, after all, why would he work alone? Wasn't the neighborhood of home close? Because it meant that this wasn't the first time this happened. You were hoping, with a terribly sickly hope, that he simply misspoke, that it was just his wording that was off. He was off in the sense that he was different than the people of your world, because you wouldn't lie to yourself any longer. It wasn't. It wasn't off or wrong. He knew what he said, though you didn't know if he meant to say it. It wasn't wrong. And out of everything, that realization that is what you wish he made you forget. How many times have you lived this scenario? How many times have you woken up thinking that today was finally the day you would understand? How many times had your hope burned out? How many times has Wally tried to give you an out? And how many times did you accept? How many chances has he given you? How many have you given him? How many times have you gotten through this exact situation? You are shouting now. The fog in your mind more akin to a raging storm. The thunder roared in your eyes. The clouds distorting everything, even making your actual vision blur. Mentally you fought back, clinging to whatever you could and demanding demanded ownership of your own existence. Wally stealing people's memories doesn't keep them safe. Yeah? Well, you're still here, aren't you? You can't keep me here forever. Did you ever think of that? He narrowed his eyes pupils, tiny and shaking. His smile remained, thin and parsed. He spoke with his hands, fingers trembling. The apron had, at some point, found home on the floor spread over the kitchen tile. There were stretch marks and his knit sweater marks. They'd obviously grabbed and pulled at them. Yet he tried to remain composed, fixing his hair and brushing off the invisible dust he had as he stayed silent. He drew it out until he finally spoke, flat voice wavering. I don't need to listen to this, neighbor. You just don't understand. You can't understand. Maybe if you explained anything, I would, you cried. You don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not planning on losing any more friends, so there. You felt a hand digging through your mind, plucking and pruning. It was too hesitant, too shuddering, unable to keep with the torrent of thoughts you had. The realizations, the curiosities, the burning fury need to understand. The lid of the pot was finally off, and it was more ready to overflow it was more than ready to overflow. You lunged for the bait, lunged for the red string of information hypothetically dangling in your face. What friends? Look around. Who are you? Why won't you stop thinking? It's so loud, neighbor. I can hear your mind screaming. I know it doesn't hurt. Not if you don't fight back. So why do you keep trying to remember? Why do you keep hurting yourself? What do you mean by losing? Oh, I know. You keep trying to guilt me into feeling bad for keeping my friend safe, but I'm not falling for it. Where did your friend... This time you aren't leaving the apartment. So whatever mind games you got cooked up, you can just drop them. We're staying put and we're staying safe. Safe from what, huh? Why can't you tell me what you're hiding from? Wally stepped away from the wall. The door? The wall? It was neither and both. Seams flickering, edges blurry. The gap underneath was no more. It was gone because there was never a gap. And spaced. Hands finding themselves in his hair, tugging at the strand. His eyes kept flickering towards you, each time the pupils larger. The hands in your mind scraping and tearing, claws digging in to yank out. The fact that you know that there's something else puts you in danger. So please stop wanting to know about it, neighbor. If you stop thinking about it, if you didn't know about it, we wouldn't have to be here. You tried to speak, but your mouth wouldn't form words. The hands in your mind were frantic, scraping and grappling your consciousness, pushing it down, deeper and deeper, snuffing out your curiosity. You had to sit down, hand to cover your eyes. Everything was too much. The fog was too thick. It was suffocating. The air was too cold. The lights too bright. The shadows too numerous. The dripping of shadows too loud. The shadows were in the ceiling. The tendrils were breaking through the cracks. The shadows were leaking out. The ceiling was a sea of black. It only lasted in a blink of an eye. So why was it still there? And a lot of freaking secret notes. Our goodness gracious, guys. Jesus. Lord, baby Jesus. Let's look at the comments. This is intense. Woo wee. Lord, baby Jesus. Let's see. Okay, so obviously our Lord and Savior Luna Moon around here. This is their whole comment. I'm not gonna read all of it. I'm probably gonna read most of it. And while I read it, we will find out what the hidden meanings are. Thus, in accordance with all likely account, it must be declared that this cosmos was made as a living creature endowed with soul and reason, a living creature, visible and one, that contains within itself all the living creatures that are, by nature, akin to itself. Objective accounts will claim this true, yet ignorance, undocumented concept of the following. As being is to belong, so is truth to belief. In belief lies reality, as the physical world is not anything more than a likely story. As truth becomes belief, so too belief becomes truth. Held within the province of the mind, it becomes a living creature endowed with meaningful soul and intelligence. And basically that says, don't leave me. Having it right instead of left helped drop the hint that things were backward. I don't know if I'm missing something with the capital letters. The most I can get is that it says don't leave me, maybe. Also, when I translated, it seemed familiar, so I looked it up in its plateau. Basically, what you can translate it to and whatnot. Blah. I think this sort of reflects of how Wally was created. People believe that he would exist, and therefore he does. It all makes me wonder if that's how the spiral was created or got manifested. MC was so convinced that they were haunted or cursed that their brain waves squiggled around that they were fun and funky spiral shape. Or if Wally made the spiral because he was so sure that knowing what he knew would make something bad happen, that it created a thing to make bad things happen. Or that would go with MC having an Ouroboros charm. Bleh. The last of his message murmured in your mind as you peered into your new surroundings. Gone was the apartment of dust, now replaced with suffocating gloom. And basically, all that we read way earlier. People will sell shit like this in New York for $1,000, $1,800 a month. The only difference is that instead of goopy darkness being eldritch in nature, it's black mold. His lies cannot be justified. So that's the upper text. So it should be coming from the spiral, but it doesn't sound like the spiral. Unless it's the spiral trying to convince the MC to come with him and play his game, so we can have cowboy times in space. And then a lot more stuff that I cannot read. You need to stop searching. You will only find misery. Please stop. The thing Wally is hiding from NC in the kitchen is that spiral they drew in Sharpie on the floor, right? I don't think he ever fully got it up. I found you. Ah, fuck. Why not turn the lights off? Underneath the waning moon, sitting in the sight of the awoken night, oblivious to the feel of might. Why not leave the lights off? Accidental conjecture. The subjective consciousness of the mind deludes. Why not let the sun burn out? Its existence futile, though the objective perspective it lies defective. I think the cipher took the longest. Also, I think I know more about what the spiral is and why it's doing what it's doing. I think back when Welcome Home was just a puppet show, Wally figured it out. I think the spiral is that void that exists under the home. I think Wally looked down in the basement where the spiral was trapped, hence why the basement and jail to him are related. And I think he looked deep in the dark, and the dark looked back. I think that the puppets weren't supposed to know that they were puppets, I think that they broke the natural order of things. I think when the spiral knew, Wally knew that it knew. I think it also knew that Wally told his neighbors. That's why Wally doesn't want to tell us anything, because I bet that the spiral didn't attack the neighborhood until more people knew than just Wally. I think that's why the spiral isn't targeting just anyone who saw the website. He's attacking us specifically. Because when you think about it, surely we're not the only people who have accessed that website. And if it's just on the website infects you with the knowledge that you shouldn't have, then there should be plenty of people to consume, many of whom aren't being protected by Wally Darling himself. But that's the whole issue. By talking to us, Wally Darling has made us aware, and the spiral can't have that. I also think that there might be something specific that the spiral destroyed the neighbors for knowing. And while we know about the spiral and a lot more things than we should, right now the spiral is absolutely trying to send us straight to EBBB, but also low-key playing with us. I think there's something that if we know it, no amount of home zone protection and memory wipes will help. We're donezo. Kaput. One less person to be marked down in the census. And I think either Wally knows exactly what that information is, but is avoiding telling as much as we can in order to keep us from deducting it, or he doesn't know exactly which button is the one that will get us blown up, metaphorically and metaphysically. And so he locked the door with the buttons, so we can't press any of them. With the buttons being forbidden knowledge. You get it? I hope you enjoyed the Apple Blossom Festival. Okay. That was where the offer went to, by the way, guys, before you get confused. Also, thank you again, Luna Moon. Thank you. This is a lot of info. Thank you. Oh, Lord. Oh, thank Luna Moon every day. I say, like, thank Luna Moon every day. Oh, Lord. Oh, goodness. I'm just reading some other ones here. Just, like, this one is a little more detailed. So, if you guys want to read a little more detailed one, this one is a comment from CI Guest. This one probably goes in more detail, specific, like little hints and stuff in the story, as far as I'm reading it. But we're just going to read Luna Moon. Thank you so much, Luna Moon, by the way, again. But yeah, because my eyes hurt, guys. My eyes hurt. Ah! Alright, y'all. We is in chapter 16 of Windows and Mirrors. Summary. At what point does a glass break? Is it designed the moment it is dropped, or when it hits the glass? At what point will it all break? Shattered glass, the new world's raindrops? And then this chapter contains strong elements of horror. Thank you so much. Oh, Lord, baby Jesus. We will figure all that out in the comments down below. There were hands in your head. 2 of them. Both larger than life. Both infinitely intricate. Soft. Delicate. They squeezed and gripped. Pulled and stretched. Fingers that dug into the soft wrinkles of your brain. Fingers digging into the division between the 2 hemispheres. Teasing them apart. Treating them like the shell of a clam. Made to pry. Made to be broken. Cracked apart. A heedless schism. They dove within the reach to the inside of you. Rolling. Pushing. Like kneading a firm ball of dough. They focused on reworking your mind. Reshaping it. Rewriting it. They aimed to break down the thoughts of rebellion, a full-bodied curiosity. They sought to pop the bubbles of intrigue. They filled the dough of your mind with new yeast of mirages of what you longed for. A confirmation of one world, of one location, of one true reality. Of a place that was easy to understand. Handcrafted notions of uncomplicated reason. Simple explanations for the unknown. the gentle reveal of an illusion made to be impossible to detect, to give you the opportunity to divulge in the fact that it hadn't been your fault, that you were merely an unwitting victim of unnatural circumstances. It festered and grew, the injected yeast flourishing in the warmth of self-doubt. It bathed in the heat of your confusion, and in your soul-crushing ache for that fading sense of normalcy. The ball of dough engorged on the bitter cocktail of emotions, the fingers poking and prodding, warping and changing. They gifted you new perspectives, new benefits, new thoughts to call your own. You noticed them now. You could recognize the thoughts that weren't yours. It didn't work. Not quite. Not truly. For one, you could not change the very fabric of the material they use. One cannot change what dough is made out of, as the very foundation of flour and liquid were the building blocks that gave it the meaning of dough. Just as the hands could not change the very core of your being. They could squeeze and strangle. They could tempt and lure. But the building blocks of you, your goals and soul, and your dreams and patterns, they were like the flour and liquid of dough. Once the dough is made from them, they cannot be removed. They can be influenced and hidden. But they themselves will never truly go away. Just as your very being cannot be replaced. Hidden, yes, from you or from the world, but never replaced. Not without time, not without decision, not without reason. And without them, without whatever patterns of thought or experiences, soul or sense of existence, without whatever you made you would no longer be you, or would you? You hoped it would never reach that point, whether it became a legitimate concern. Could you still be considered yourself if you changed? How much change would be acceptable without the passage of time, without being swaddled in an ever-shifting world with no true control? What made you, you? For change through time was natural. So what was change without? Could it still be you? For a ship is still the same ship no matter how many repairs it's gone through. Gifted security in the knowledge of self through the very oceans it sailed and crews that ran it. Were you like a ship sailing on the waters of a universal semi-lucid consciousness, never aware enough to see what resided under the surface, trading bits of mast, strips of sails with others that held impact in your life? Always changing, always adapting. Somehow the same ship regardless of what you went through? Or subscribing to a different train of thought. The self never existed in the first place. You never really existed. That the you called you, existed in the very microsecond in which you claimed it true. For that brief fraction of time, in that sliver, you existed. Beyond that point, it was still you, but it wasn't the same as it was seconds, minutes, hours, or days, weeks, or years before or after. The self was ever changing, witnessed into being only in the movement it was seen. Elsewise, it never actually was, and would never be. Simply a fabrication of thought, a name given to something that could never be quantified. For what would you call an ever-changing substance? One that was solid one day, vaporous fumes the next? One that carried toxins, and another day a cure for illness? Would it be considered different reactions, ultimately different in future and makeup? How could you ever be quantified if you today and the you tomorrow would be different people? It only took a missing hour of sleep, a surprise gift, or just talking to someone to change the emotional lens one's experienced through their life before. Through their life. Their life through. Excuse me. Were you your body, or did you resign within it? To others, to everyone, that wasn't you. The former may be true. For humans, like many things, are primarily visual creatures. It is the sense that is most relied on, though it is far from the only one. So, to others, when they thought of you, perhaps they thought of the visual representation of you that existed within the world rather than your brain, your mind, the core of who you actually were. Or perhaps they thought of the sound of your voice, or the smell of your home, the things you've done, things you've been involved in, things that are bioproducts of your existence, but perhaps not the real substance of you. Even your opinions, the ones that you voiced to others, weren't all you were. Opinions change. People learn. You changed. You've learned. You didn't look like you did as a child. Your body matured, and so did your wisdom. You didn't wear the same clothes as you did when you were 8, nor when you were 14. If you dyed your hair now, how different would it really be? Would that make you someone new? If you changed your name, first or last, or middle, or any combination thereof, would that make you someone else? Yet a tree was still a tree, whether it was called a tree or pine, an oak or named Jeffrey, just as a rose or by any other name would still be a rose, just as it was as sweet and still filled with petals and thorns. The physical world, the names and understanding, how much of it impacted what actually was. Did all things, living or not, breathing or not, human or not, face the same conundrum, limited by evolution and the senses they had access to, trapped within a glass bubble of perspective? What was perspective other than how one experiences the world itself? If a tree fell in the forest and nothing was there to hear it, would it still make a noise? You would still be you if you had a different name, wouldn't you? After all, no name is truly unique. But the hundreds of millions of humans on the planet, unforetold billions of billions of living beings that could have names regardless of what they were. Any number of them could share your name. So what made your name yours? Millions of lives could be shoved into a room upon room upon room upon room, all with features like your own. Maybe it would just be a name that you would share, or maybe it would be more than that. It could be physical features, similar skin tones, hair types, eyes or ears, mouths or teeth, similar builds, similar smiles, similar ways of hiding tears. It could be familiar ways of standing, of sitting, of waiting for a better future, or bearing unspoken memories. It could be life stories with the same themes, or families like your own, schools like the ones you had, or the relationships with your friends and peers. So what made your personality unique, besides the fact that you claimed it as your own? So what then made you you? If it wasn't your body, if it wasn't the physical form that only made up only a fraction of the totality of you, what was it? Could it be soul or spirit or consciousness? Whichever name it was given. Did the name really matter when the concept it was implied was so varied to begin with? That made you you, molded by the very surroundings you were born into and that you were raised in, the ones that you existed in now, shaped by each interaction and each missed interaction, and every one random in the grand scheme of the universe, or lack of scheme, depending on which lens of life was seen through. One thing was for certain: No one picked how their life would be before they lived them. Imagine the lives people would lead if they could. Nothing like this would have happened if you had a choice. Maybe you weren't the same as you were as you that could have picked your life. If 100 souls were given the exact same life, same body and name, same friends and family and school and hobbies, how different would they be? How many similarities would live in the cavern of each of those souls? How many differences would roam in the gorge that separated their consciousness? How much would they be like you? Or would they all be you? Different parts of you? Different people who could have once become. You could have once become. My English. Different versions of you? All the real you in their own sense of the world? Variations of the theme of you? Or would they cease to exist the moment they serve no purpose in their hypothetical existence? What actually made you, you, if you couldn't even begin to define the truly unique aspects of what you were made of? Were you simply a series of electrical pulses in the shape known as a brain, bathed in blood and formed of gray-scaled matter? A seemingly endless stream of neurons within synapses, of rhythms and patterns, of signals and signs. Controller of a body that was home to billions of bacteria and minuscule organisms. A living universe unaware of the thriving microscopic biomes that it hosted. A master to a puppet made of biological matter? Surely not. You knew you were more than that, right? So then, what made you, you? What made up the concept of you? You felt the hands falter, both retreating as the dough of thoughts ballooned out of control. It writhed like a living beast, a manifestation of your natural disposition towards existence. Optimism turned to jaws, determination into fangs that bit. Your strength to hold on, not forget. To not forget became the claws that struck, the claws that would protect. And eyes, your eyes, all of your eyes, the eyes that weren't yours, yet lived under your skin, the eyes that weren't yours, yet bubbled within, the eyes that you saw in the mirror, the eyes that you saw in your reflection. They were inside you. They were festering, bulbous masses, ready to burst free, ready to erupt through the pores of your very skin, glared towards the hands. You could see double, the apartment around you and the world inside the realm of hands and thoughts. The walls you lived in clashed with walls you've only ever seen through a screen. Scarlet upon snow, multicolored walls burned through the off-white of your own, white bleeding red. The ink dripped from the walls, leaking from the ceiling. It was a fine spray, spreading like black mold on top of it all. The growth of rot. Internal. The hands flickered between faint shadowy suggestions of themselves in solid sunflower yellow, between being made of wisps of clouds and from pure sunshine. They were solid yet not, as two was your mind, trapped between two worlds. Your mind was changed into a growing beast of rage and sorrow, snarling blind confusion. You could see the vague impression of a face distorted in distress, but you couldn't see the face, not with your eyes, not with your human eyes, not in any way that mattered. You didn't have a face yourself, yet the only face you've ever had was your own. The hand smashed into the dough, sharp and fearful. It popped the building pressure, shoving it down. It crushed your mind, shrinking it, starving it. You continued to fight a battle you didn't understand. You stopped and bit at the hands that failed to feed. They barely flinched, the desperation much stronger than your fury. It was a battle of wills, unwilting and painful. And you found yourself wishing, not for the first time, that you understood what was happening. Dimly, somewhere in your choking mind, you finally understood one thing. You knew you were sitting down. You could feel the wooden chain. You knew that Wally meant now that anyone needed a concept of self before existing as themselves. You knew you had eaten the clumps of sweet pancakes that clung to your teeth. It was so much easier leaving the formation of that concept to another outside of oneself. After all, who were you truly? You knew whose hands they were, and they were just as fleecy soft as you remembered. You understood it now. Wally didn't understand himself. There was a faint sound of a phone ringing. He was afraid. It was a forced atrophy of the self. A necrotic wound encouraged to fester, not out of revenge or sadistic delight, but out of something far, far worse. Encouraged not for selfishness, but out of the delusion of selfless protection. It was a gift of self-negligence, a promise of indifferent obliviousness. For as long as you never thought of it, would be like it never existed. Why struggle in the face of the impossible? Why hold on to something far greater than what could be understood? Memories were forgotten for a reason, after all. Whether it's because they were too painful, weren't important, or various distractions overpowered them, they ended up being forgotten. They can even fade through the passage of time alone, details dropping off as the months go by. Faces turned blurry after the years pass. It was a natural process that let new memories form, that gave birth to new facets of the ever-changing nature of each person. It was a gift of self-inflicted entropy. However, if memories were always forgotten for a reason, what was the reason to forget these memories? Why weren't you supposed to remember? What weren't you supposed to remember? There had to be a reason, hadn't there? It was more than just an experiment, more than just freak coincidences. It wasn't some cosmic joke. You weren't some guinea pig. You weren't some joke. You felt your body felt disconnected, your mind drifting even further from conscious awareness. The walls you saw bled more red. The chair you sat in an abstract blob of mud. You couldn't remember where the windows on the wall had been. You could have sworn you saw pupils in the windows. It all felt fake, like a poorly constructed dream. The colors meant nothing. Your position meant nothing. You weren't even sure you were real. Everything felt wrong when the hands were elbows deep in your head, when you could feel those dreadful fingers cradling your brain with a sort of reverence that made you feel ill, like your scalp had been peeled back, skull cracked open like a can, your very brain contents sought after, a cranial container for the processing of all perception tampered by metaphysical hands. You wonder how many times he's done this. Though the hands worked with the contents of your mind like putty, there was one thing that they would never change. It was something less ambiguous than the identity of you, whether that be soul or mind, heart or body, a series of coincidences or a unique singularity that manifested as you, and something deeply ingrained in all sorts of living beings. You wondered how many times it worked, how many times your mind had been successfully reshaped. The hands couldn't stop your survival instincts. The ability to overcome and adapt, the drive to continue being. The very survival instincts that kept ecosystems alive and fueled the continuation of your very own species like millenniums. And the curiosity that came with it. The ambiguation to answer the call of the unknown. To solve mystery of knowledge not yet gained. No matter how the hands pruned, what they did, what they cut off, none of it could reach the very core of your species, what your species evolved with. Whether through soul or not, whether through instinct or not, whether it was buried under enforced disillusionment or secured behind walls made of unfaltering desperation, even if it became a ghost, death of the self, haunting the concept of you, it never truly died. A phoenix, reborn, a landscape of ashes and endless fire. It never broke down. It never crumbled under the weight of those palms. You were safe from the unintentional shattering of your consciousness. But that didn't mean you were immune. As you began gaining back your awareness, certain details of your surroundings remained fuzzy. They flickered, blurred at strange points, like the door that wasn't a door, like the tile floor that was now shards and sand, like the walls that were breathing, like the shadows that were moving. It was hard to see, like being tossed within an all-encompassing optical illusion. But you had experience now, with the bearing witness to the impossible. You no longer flinched when you saw, or believed you saw. It was hard to tell. When everything was spinning, the ground lurching under the chair you sat upon. The kitchen cabinets quickly melt from the strawberry red and cheerful blue to the same dull oak brown you recognized. As if they forgot what they were supposed to look like. As if your environment forgot what it was supposed to be. You couldn't even look up now. Physically, your body was incapable of doing so. When you did, whether you craned your neck skywards or tried peering up without moving, you never saw a ceiling. Your eyes flickering down, or the blurriness would turn to a flash of white. Even the tops of the walls were foggy, hidden behind a thick mist of luminous white and streaked with cracks of black. There was a faint dripping sound, off rhythm and chunky. It dripped and dripped, dripped. It dripped, 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 echoing in your ear. It came in waves. The louder it was, the more you noticed the weak audio static. It was nearly silent. The static was barely more than a brief flicker. When you looked around, I squinted to peer through the random patches of blurred reality to see where it was coming from. It was only dripping, so why did it make you feel ill with dread? To your immediate right was a wall without any possible cause of the dripping. Ahead was the rest of the dining table, really more than a glorified desk that could uncomfortably fit 3 people at the most, and another chair. Beyond that was a small gap, and then your makeshift office. Though all the electronics that would have been there were gone. The rest of your living room was to your left, which was basically all your living room and the wall-free hallway with doors to your bedroom, bathroom, and small storage closet. In the living room itself, it was your regular couch and side table. On the wall across from that, there was a pale rectangle. It once would have hosted a television. Yet now it was bare, making the space feel oddly emptier. Though you couldn't see much of the carpet or coffee table ahead of the couch. From what you could see, there was no culprits of the dripping sound. Why was that worse somehow? The windows along the opposite wall on your right side, still tall rectangles of purely snowy white. They were taller now, elongated, yet the tops of them were still the same distances from the ceiling. It was the windows and windows alone that were stretched out. They hurt to look at. It was painful to look at too. Far too bright and yet without light, hazy and glowing. Dull and listless. Pearly monoliths, shedding the scales of glass pans. It was once contained behind. My English is so bad. I'm sorry, guys. The walls around them had patterns growing like plants. A playful of playful vines and poorly drawn flowers, a worsening infestation of paisley print. Only when you looked at them did they have color. Otherwise, they were dull. More of a shiny sheen on an otherwise ancient wall. You would have checked if the pattern grew on the ceiling, but you weren't able to do so. You aren't able to look up after all. With a deep breath, you push yourself up to look around the rest of the apartment. Though your steps were wobbly, you were able to walk too without too much hassle. First, you inspected your office again, checking under the table for any electrical cords. Unfortunately, there was nothing. All your files, all your USBs, all the photos you saved, and the worst part by far, anything related to your camera was gone. Everything you used for your I always say this word wrong, photography business stolen, as if it never existed. There was just a fine layer of dust coating everywhere it shouldn't. You tried checking out the windows close up, but walking towards them was like pressing two magnets on the same side together. Reality itself refused your presence. There was an aura pushed you back. The closer you trotted towards them, the more it pushed and pushed, until your heels were digging into the ground and your teeth gritted with effort. You could no longer move forwards, though not for the lack of trying. You couldn't even put your hands ahead of your body without the great force shoving you back. The pillars were portals into colorless desolation that became taller and closer the closer you got. They now stood nearly three times your height, winding and twisting up on themselves, though still perfect rectangles. The walls beside them matched the growth, the objects against them warping to fit their new dimensions. The table and everything on it, the curtains and pictures on the wall, they all went through the process. Upon the table was a treasured object that hurt to look at. Stretched out and wrong, the simple painted wooden statue of a small dragon you had, burnt orange with an underside of cream, turquoise wings, and a flaming tail, was now more akin to a snake. Eyes forced to stretch wider and wider, pupils small and shaking, thinner now than before due to not only growing upwards, its arms were too narrow to stay attached, the wood breaking with a horrid shattering sound, the tips of the fox flame of its tail doing the same. The picture on the wall, one of the close-up of a deer you found in the forest once. It grew too strange. The trees around it spiraled, thick trunks now giant columns supporting the very emerald roof above, leaves looking more like a speckled marble ceiling than a grand hall with how distorted they were. The grasses around the deer matched the lengthening legs, far too long, stretched too thin. The body turned bulbous, huge and chunky, compared to the ever-narrowing neck, the head warping into a deer-inspired blob. The eyes, though, they kept the same light, the same glow of life. They begged you to stop it as they stretched to the reflections of the forest, with now tears in its eyes. The dark irises, black voids. You were spared. Or were you? You felt weird. You felt behind. Left behind. An ant in the focused beam of magnified sunlight. It hurt. It didn't usually hurt like this. What changed? Abandoned in the face of the obscure, you felt ill. It started with the burning in your eyes that came from looking at the wrongness around you. It was everywhere, an obvious wrong that you couldn't trick yourself into forgetting. The walls that were stretched like puffy pulled taffy, taller and taller until they were 4 times your height, and the light, it was sickly. It made your skin prickle and your stomach roll. It caused waves of nausea to eventually overwhelm your curiosity as the invisible force shoving you back finally won. forcing you to turn away from the not windows or risk throwing up. Safe to say you were going to ignore the windows for now, or just try not to think about them. If you didn't think about it, it wouldn't matter. After all, denial is very much a healthy coping mechanism. You sat down and leaned on the side of the couch, still facing the windows, waiting for the nausea to fade. Until then, you only looked at the ground, specifically at the point where the wooden floors were covered by the large carpet of your living room. The carpet was fluffier than you remember. The strands of the soft fuzz was longer, half the length of your palm. You played with it, twisting the strands together. You pressed them down, making a wet squishing. It made a wet squishing noise, like something that was stuck underneath. Like something wet was stuck underneath. You lifted the edge to reveal what it was. The experience with the not windows, not draining you all of your curiosity. You immediately dropped it and scrambled up, leaping off the carpet as the nausea swelled. The bottom of the carpet was covered in an inky black substance. It was thick, stuck tight to the carpet's woven back, small tendril-like growths jutting out, almost like roots. They had nestled themselves into the fine cracks between the boards of the hardwood, and now they practically seemed to reach out now that they were uprooted. The section of the floor where it sat coated with a dark, glossy sheen. Rushing over to the three doors left, you shook off your disgust. Maybe you just had a severely overlooked cause of black mold here, or maybe it was some sort of harmless fungus. You hoped that was true. For how long had it been there since you deep cleaned the place? Maybe the spores had always been there and you never noticed it. Too caught up with cycling hyperfixations and the photography business. Yet, what sort of mold could move on its own? What sort of fungus could grow like that if it knew where to hide in plain sight? And if it was here, surely there would be more elsewhere, right? You knew what it was. You wondered if Wally knew it was there. You skipped the closet and stood in front of the bathroom door, arms crossed and fingers tapping. The bathroom was sealed shut, the handle even worse than before, instead looking like the greyhound Cerberus had used it as a chew toy. It was more akin to a ball of uneven spikes. Even the door, it was supposed to be a door, right? You could have sworn this was a door. This was the door was supposed to be. This is where the door was supposed to be. But it didn't look like a door. It was a natural. The edges melted into the wall. The bottom gap solid. The next place to check was your bedroom. And to your distress, that door was too in the similar state. The handle, though, it was different. Rather than spikes, it was just gone. The only sign that a door was once there was a rough square indent on the wall, a small gap in the baseboard, and a star-shaped metal plate. Pushing did nothing, and there was nothing you could do to break down the wall. You bit your tongue and turned to the left to see the final place to check, the kitchen. Through narrowed eyes, you saw him. Wally was there, breathing gone, body still. He faced away from you, the sink running and a pile of drying dishes on the side. You approached wearily, the sound of rushing water thunderous, drowning out the dripping, drying out whatever words Wally was muttering to himself. You weren't too sure how long the water was left on for, and you weren't entirely sure he knew either. As you came behind the counter, you could see the side of his face. He wore the closest thing to a frown you've seen. His smile, small, thin, warning. His lips moved as he spoke, voice too low and unintelligible to make any sense. His eyes were unfocused, blankly staring at his hands under the water. They were twisted and fidgeted, subs itself cascading down the sides. His hands appeared as saturated orange from the moisture, though there was still ink stains on his fingertips. On autopilot mode, he continued to clean them. Each time his hands were free of suds, he'd shake them off, grabbing more soap and starting the cycle anew. Looking around, half of the kitchen was pearly white, nearly glowing with how clean it was. Yet the floor had been disseminated. Most of the tile completely torn up and shattered, leaving behind stamps of porcelain. Dust of it covered the black of Wally's shoes, and danced up the sides of his Technicolor pants in uneven streaks, paired with the black fingerprints that still covered the edges of his shirt collar and the bottom part of his sleeves. He almost looked like he was falling apart. Falling apart both mentally and physically, like a toy accidentally tossed out the window of a car, left to tumble to a stop alone, left to meander through an alien world not built for its survival. You felt equal parts pity and terror, because you knew that this wasn't all he was. You knew what you were seeing in front of you, a puppet-human fusion, the exact same height as yourself, was not all he was. He was completely unique, a being with a non-comparison in your world. He was different, and he had powers that defied all rules of reality. If he was like this, how bad was the thing you shouldn't remember? And he was the one messing with your mind. It was so nice to finally be able to think that without feeling pain. Which means that he knew that you weren't supposed to remember. There had been a reason. There had to be a reason, right? He wouldn't do this without reason, would he? Which means he knows now that you didn't forget. He knew you didn't forget. You didn't forget it this time. Wally, are you alright? You asked, leaning over the counter as he could hopefully see you out of the corner of his eyes. He didn't respond. Continued to wash his hands with a lecture frenzy, like his energy was slowly draining, yet he used all of it just to do this. He waved your hands in his face, frowning when he still didn't react. Poking his shoulder did nothing, and neither did taking the soap away. The only thing you could do was turn off the tap. Once his hands were free of suds, you shut it off. Then continued to rub his hands together, all 4 fingers interlocking and disconnecting as he did so. His sleeves were creased, wrinkled from once being shoved up in his elbows. They now hung by his wrists, shades darker and dripping from how wet they were. He reached out to where the soap had been to get more, mimicking the action of getting more soap without actually doing so, before returning to wash his hands. Eyes near eerily blank. You couldn't shake the feeling. You stepped away, stomach rolling, a weight settling deep in your guts. You still couldn't look upwards. The ceiling still a sea of burning white. Even if you managed to see at all, the floor was a mess. The puddle by his feet coating most of the kitchen floor, mixing with the dust of broken tiles. The muddy mixture oozed in the material of your socks, thick and cold. Grimacing, you padded away, deciding to search for more clues without bothering him again. Maybe he just needed time. That something was terribly, terribly wrong. You felt your feet made a wet squelch each time you took a step, getting more uncomfortable as it began to dry. Looking around, you shrieked and tripped back. Around the edges of the carpet, the large carpet that covered most of your living room, one that you tried not to think about, there was another puddle. This one wasn't made out of anything. You understood. Instead, it was made from exactly what you tried not to understand. With small tendrils that reached like hands, it pulled from under the rug. This was a puddle of pure, inky oil, so dark that there was no reflections, so dark that there was no light. It ate at any that hit it, appearing 2D in the 3-dimensional surroundings, like it was devouring reality itself. It spread through winding tendrils that filled thin gaps between the planks of wood and floor, branching out into webs before connecting into more of itself. You were paralyzed, watching in dread as it ever so slowly grew out closer from under the carpet, tendrils reaching, darkness spreading, and placed innocently in the center of the coffee table in the middle of the carpet. It was your phone. The same phone that you once homed your paradoxical friend. The very phone that was now a gateway to pure shadows. It was impossibly dark, a sort of darkness that reacted like light. It made air above it waver with shadows that couldn't be. It cast a ring of midnight haze on the table it sat upon. The screen seemed to flicker sporadically, the angle you could see it from making it too difficult to see what it was. Just the sight alone sent shivers up your spine, ejecting ice into your veins. Your jaw clenched tight, your arms close to your body, hands interlaced with each other. Your breathing stilled, and the air tasted burnt. You were right. It was a challenge to even move your legs as the need to flee arose. You pictured moving them back, remembering all the times that you could move willingly, just in the hopes of getting away from the bubbling, spreading growth. Your lungs struggled too, and your heart fell heavier as your pulse slowed, muscles beginning to strain. But you couldn't look away as the phone lit more. The more shadows, shadows now like an orb above the phone, flickering into being, growing stronger, growing ever more present. Had it not been overtaking your very home, you would almost describe it as it being beautiful, in a morbid way, like watching a tragedy unfold, knowing the ending will be bittersweet at best, yet still finding peace in the moments before it all went downhill. Like a time-lapse video of a plant's life. Buds turned to leaves, green turned brown, each one replaced over and over. A cycle of growth and decay. A reminder that the very nature of being alive gave you a bias towards more life. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of decay. Everything was wrong. Decay was more than something to be feared. It was what gave the ground new chance to raise new plants, which led to nourishment towards the entire ecosystem. It was what let things change. It was what the catalyst that let life be life. For without decay, without death, would living ever be an option? Everything would be locked in one standstill reality. Nothing new, nothing old, all the same. Decay was what made time matter. But decay was not what gave you meaning. It also reminded you of a story you once read long, long ago. One of inescapable death. One of an inevitable ending. Written about the final moments of the universe. Set in a future following the last moments of a scientist. It spoke of humanity's effort to survive. A machine built to exist longer than the planet itself. To collect information of non-existence once everything once known and experienced no longer was. Hailed as a refuge of human conquest, it survived no longer than a fraction of a second. It was considered a success despite how brief a blip its existence truly was. The puddle reminded you of the chaos that the end brought the people in that story that one day could be true. It reminded you of how fragile the mere act of being really was. And it reminded you of fire. Not just any fire. It reminded you of the eyes that hid in the lapping flames and searing sparks. and of the eyes that you saw in the mirror. You managed only a few steps back before the phone rang. It was loud, too loud. So loud the walls shook with the sound. Each shrill note a jackhammer against your eardrums. It was distorted, dipping deep at the ends with each start reaching higher than the last, blaring louder than the last. It felt like it lasted for hours, time passing at a snail's pace while you stared out in shock, disbelief. After Wally barged into your life, and the phone ever rung without him, and the phone never had the phone ever rung without him being on the other side? As the bubble of shadows above the phone solidified, you felt your strength return. It was only enough to move away, feet dragging and leaving a trail of damp footsteps behind. Your goal was to not just to escape, as your instinct screamed for you to do so, but to also see Wally. You knew he was connected to what was happening. You just didn't know how. Your voice was dry from what felt like a menace. Wally? You saw that the very moment he processed your voice, his head whipped towards the sound movement paired with an audible snap. His eyes were far too large, twin moons of a silky white, and practically glowing as he stared at you. His pupils shrunk slowly, draining as more and more white poured through, illuminating the kitchen in a sickly light, like tiny black boats in rough silver waters. Battered and beaten, his pupils shook, anxious and desperate. The air turned cold, the smell of smoke fading as you stared at one another. You shivered, clenching your chattering teeth. The tonal shift of you throwing you off guard. And he still wasn't answering. Half turned and hunched over, sweater oddly buttoned and sleeves hanging wet. The ink that once covered the tips of the fingers had spread. His fingers into a mix of malted black, green, and gray. His body trembled with energy, like a arrow straddled in the drawstring of a bow, aimed and ready. You coughed, trying to break the moment, trying to snap him out of it. It didn't work. Wally, unhearing, eyes further widened, fully circular, his smile strangely neutral compared to his distressed state. Even his hair was off, strands falling around his face. The large pompadour, more like a messy bird's nest that lost its spiral shape. Maybe it's Rosie. You know how she gets when you don't answer her phone calls. She'll ring and ring till your phone runs out. Just to tell you to call her back later. You try to humor to lighten the mood. Dry humor, to be specific. This was no time for a dad joke. Admittedly, your attempt was quite poor, and it was obvious that Wally didn't find it funny at all, judging by how his body twisted to face yours, head cocked and pupils bouncing between you and the phone behind you. The only sign that he really noticed that you said when he flinched. It was small and tiny, even if had you not been staring. Oh my goodness, my English. Tiny even. And had you not been staring at him, you wouldn't have noticed. It was delayed, like he was only partially hearing. Still, you could tell you said the wrong thing. Where did you hear that name? She's my friend. Don't you remember your friend's name? Your friends' names? You shrugged, playing it cool. There were far more important things to talk about now than friendships, but you'd humor him for now. It was the best chance of getting more information, even a sliver of context. The air was heavy with dread. Firstly, you shouldn't remember that. His eyes twitched as he let out a huff, muttering to himself. He moved towards you, his steps nearly silent, his limbs moving oddly, like a marionette breaking free from its strings. His arms snapped downwards as his shoulders slumped oddly, though his voice remained monotone. You could hear the tension hidden within. His next words were spoken more to himself than to you, though you still heard him clearly. Of course you don't really care about keeping yourself safe, do you, neighbor? Why do you always... Secondly, it can't be her. That would be impossible. No, it wouldn't. She knows my number, and we've talked many times before, you cried. Frustration boiling over the strangeness of it all got to you. You felt increasingly vulnerable, knowing that there was black sinew, spreading out behind you, and that there was something coming out from your phone. That the ceiling didn't want to be seen, and the windows were less windows and more like obelisks. The fog had blurred lower, melting into the pale glow of his eyes, and the not-quite windows were flashing from a solar brightness to nothing at all. It's impossible, because your phone was tampered with. All I could call or message you. Only I could call or message you. Though I did have a pleasant conversation with your friend Rosie. I told her you were sick. You know, that sort of sickness people can't go near. With how loud your thoughts and with how loud your thoughts are, I thought you already figured that out, my friend. You felt that you were being examined. The gaze of many eyes focused directly on your back. It crawled up your spine, skeletal hands hovering over your shoulders, the discomfort coming in rolling waves. You psyched yourself to not look back, because you weren't going to be the first death in a horror movie. Most importantly, you ignored the idea that maybe you already died. Maybe you were in a cycle of learning and learning and learning, dying before you really could get the answer. Wally cut you off, closer than it had been moments before. Now, whatever you do, you mustn't turn around, okay? Your mouth moved before you could think of speaking. And why should I trust you? Because you and I both know that's no answer. Look, I'll explain later, okay, neighbor? But we really don't have the time for trading thoughts and theories right now. I know you understand that there's more at stake than just your pride, right, friend? You didn't offer a reply. And that was the end of it, it seemed. Wally stepped closer and closer until he was standing in front of you. His eyes still off, dancing between your own and whatever was behind you, and the urge to turn around grew. Something was there, and you had seen the forming orb, seen the ooze, seen the mind-bending geometry reshaping your very apartment. Was this what he didn't want you to see? Was this what you weren't supposed to remember? Had this happened before? Did he try to make you forget so you could turn back to an off apartment, an off atmosphere, and stuck in a hazy stalemate with the most stubborn person you've ever met? Return to the numbing confusion? To questioning every thought you have? Everything you could ever do? If he made you forget, what would there be? Would that be where you'd be right now? If you hadn't fought it, would you be safe right now? Still, you stood your ground, though you hadn't outright said it before, or if you did, you couldn't remember. You now felt like the question was a good one to have. Why should you trust Wally? What had he done to earn that trust? For trust was a fickly thing, hard to give and even harder to earn. And when you thought about it, you weren't even sure if he trusted you. When did you decide to trust him? Did he make that choice for you? You didn't trust him to wipe your memories properly, because you never knew he was behind it all until now. You didn't trust him in your apartment. He basically invaded your space and claimed as an extension of his own. You didn't trust him in your phone. He took it over and practically begged you for friendship. You didn't trust his words, because he always spoke in half-truths and honey-dipped statements. But still, you trusted that. What little he did to tell you was true. What little he did tell you was true. You trusted that he wanted to help you, no matter how bizarre the situation was. You know, deep down, that he was doing what he thought was good. He had so many opportunities to hurt you, and he didn't. Not in any way that left scars. Not in any way that left you gone. Though his method of protection was more unusual than words could describe, he was still trying to protect you. Then again, he was the one that introduced you to the oblivion now after you. It was complicated, but in this very moment you had two options. Trust his judgment about this thing behind you, or trust your instincts that begged to know what you were up against, because he could be lying, because he was acting strange, because there was no end to the questioning, no end to the curiosity, no end to the desire to know. The phone rang once more, startling both of you. Wally was antsy, hands tapping erratically against his thighs as his eyes darted between you and the phone, his face draining of saturation. In that moment, your curiosity won over any eternal debate you had over trusting him. So you chose to look, because you were nothing if not just as stubborn as he was, if not more so. In the milliseconds it took you to turn, Wally had already lunged, throwing himself towards the phone with his arms stretched out. His hands were aimed towards the target. The sleeves of his cardigan rippling in the air. His shoes squeaked against the wooden floors, still wet. He paid no heed to the dark puddle, blindly leaping towards the sound of the ringing phone, the merciless chiming making it hard for you to process what was happening. You were already dashing towards it, even if your brain hadn't processed what you were looking at. You chose to go after the phone rather than throwing yourself at it in the hopes that Wally missed his target. The apartment around you flashed, white screaming in your face, darkness overwhelming it in brief stints. The air flickering hurt to bear witness to. It was like running face first into a star, all in all encompassing incinerator, burning your eyes, burning your skin. It didn't stop you. The sound of your feet hitting the ground was a heartbeat in its own right, rushed and frightened. The distance wasn't far, but it felt like the ground was stretching out, separating you from the phone. Each normal step requiring twice that right now. Wally had jumped over the puddle, clear over the puddle, but you had to clamber over the arm of the couch to avoid stepping in it. The urge to vomit returning when you briefly noticed all the finger growths reaching towards you from the oozing surface. There was no time to think. Wet socks oozing as they thumped against the coffee table, balance becoming your focus as you scooped down to grab the phone. Wally was quicker, and before you could execute your plan, he swiped it away. His grip wasn't right, though, and despite aiming to snatch it, it fell onto the ground, onto the island the carpet had become. There was a pause, brief enough that you recognized that the shadowy orb hovering in the air wasn't leaving. And when the race was on, Wally scrambling from his forward position to reach the target, limbs bending oddly as he did so. You dove towards it, thoughtless abandon as you crashed into him, getting a fistful of royal blue cardigan rather than the phone. He scrambled up and held it above your head, chest heaving and eyes wide. His smile was broad, though you couldn't tell if it was from him panting. The adrenaline, did he even experience that? The rush, the energy, the everything happening all at once and being anything you needed in that moment? Or from being the victor? It didn't matter. Grabbing his sleeves and pulling it hard and taking to force him to drop it. Why did you want the phone so badly? Moments before, you weren't afraid of it. Weren't you afraid of it? His arm didn't move. It didn't even budge. You used both hands and pulled, but it was like trying to bend a metal pole. He stayed firm, even when your fingers sunk into a fine layer of fuzz that coated his skin, disappearing into yellow fluff. He looked between you and the phone, ensuring that the screen never faced you as you climbed onto the coffee table to grab it that way. He stopped you. You forgot about the orbs of shadows. You felt it lick at the back of your neck as you were pulled away, the sensation of being watched nearly paralyzing. The darkness in the corner of your eyes, the puddle that was now leaking up the wall. It had been more than just fingers now. It had arms. It had hands. It was reaching tendrils upon tendrils, each slithering through the air towards you, towards the orb. It was wrong. So wrong. And wrongness so oblivious and distorted that you couldn't look at it. The carpet didn't save you from the image burned into your mind, seared in and left to scar. Left as a reminder of what you shouldn't have remembered, and what you shouldn't have tried to learn. A reminder that sometimes curiosity was not worth it. You saw the sight when you closed your eyes, of the arms outreached, the oozing black skin of crackling sinew, bubbling and sizzling as eyes popped out from within, coating the arms, coating the walls. Some were as large as you were tall. Some were no bigger than your pinky nail. What? The hands didn't stem from the tip of the arms, but rather from the inside of the pupils, climbing out with horrid screeching, like a cacophony of voices screaming in unison. Though the eyes themselves had no reflection, there was no mirror image of their face in the largest of the eyes, one located right where the TV had been, the one that was bigger than you. It took up most of the wall appearing to bulge upwards just to accommodate it. The more tendrils waving around. It focused on you, your face trapped in its pupil, mirror of fate and misfortune. You couldn't forget, though you wish you could. You wondered how. You wondered now, because if you kept fighting, if Wally wouldn't give you the mercy of forgetting. You couldn't scream, though you wanted to. You wondered how many horrors he bore witness to, without the kindness of stolen memories. Wally grabbed your hand, the 4 fingers wrapped tight around your palm as he tugged you with him. You focused on what you could feel, for your other senses were overwhelmed with the impact of the eyes. His skin was soft, almost like a living plush. The exterior fuzz dense enough to almost be smooth, at least on his palm and the pads of his fingers. His hand gave off no heat, though it also wasn't cold. His hand was a degree above the room temperature, akin to your own. Oh, sorry, guys. You stumbled as he dragged you to the front door, miraculously not stepping into any inky oil, though you weren't entirely sure, for your socks were still wet and the room was flickering yet more aggressively between burning light and starving shadows. The one thing you could make out, beside Wally himself, was his hand gripping that chewed-up handle of the not quite door, the jagged edges digging into his hand, the serrated blade into plush. He tore it open. The sound of shattering wood drowned out by the dripping and echoes of the screaming eyes. It hit the wall with a slam, and as quickly as you ran towards the phone, you both tumbled down the stairs into the smaller foyer on the main floor, crashing into the final door. It wasn't sealed shut at the bottom like the others. The wall hadn't grown over it like a healing scar. The handle wasn't mutilated beyond all hopes. It looked horrifically normal, picture perfect and slightly worn, not by entities nor from terror, but from the gentle hand of time. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle, the door already unlocked. He crowned it so you couldn't reach it. Not that you felt like doing so. Stomach rolling and skin prickling, nausea shimmering in your guts. The floor was crooked under your feet. The walls streaked different colors. At times you saw the tops of walls leaking black, leaking the same dreadful oil. Then it would be replaced with a burning bright light, white pouring in from an unknown source, forcing you to squint. After that, it would briefly flicker to the stairway, dust and dull, no more special than a grain of sand from a desert. The only thing remaining the same throughout it all was Wally, as if the rules of lighting known to your world didn't affect him. Free from the shadows and the aura of blinding light, even the door, as normal and unamusing as it was still mirrored and the intensity of light around it, though not as extremely as the walls. It was limbo, standing there, torn between two realms, one of a world you were born from, and the other you spent eternity in, caught betwixt the inner and outer realities that lives were created in, within the natural and unnatural, the plain and the extraordinary, lost safety and in safety to be lost. It was calming and terrifying. It was everything you couldn't stand. The unknown was more than just a theoretical concept you could ponder within the safety of your bedroom, thinking of all the possibilities of a world you dreamed of one day seeing. It was there behind you, and it was ahead of you. If you found, even if it was currently after you, the unknown you hadn't met was still just as terrifying. For at least you understood, though you didn't. Not really, not truly, not at all. And yet it felt familiar, like a building seen across from your schoolyard as a kid. Barely remembered, yet had you gone back, you would have noticed the change. It understood some of the rules that kept you safe. Out there was the unknown and the unmet. There was the possibility that it would be normal, and there was a possibility that it would be anything but. Wally grabbed the handle, his grip on you was tightening as he began opening the door. Close your eyes with bated breath. Between two unknowns. How could anyone know which one was safe? Oh, Lord, baby Jesus! Oh my goodness. Oh, Lord, baby Jesus, my throat is like killing me right now. Lord, baby Jesus, guys. Lord, this was beautiful, honestly. This was beautiful, honestly. Just, wow. I can't. It's beautiful, guys. It's beautiful. Let's go through the comments for them secrets. Alright, guys. I'm gonna like summarize what's on Luna Moon's comment here. But I will say the main important details. Got it. Let's do a thought experiment, shall we? Dive into another realm, another dimension, and imagine this. You're on an island. You're alone. The only other one that is a being so completely and utterly different from your definition of life that it may not be considered alive itself. Your survival depends on communicating with it. What do you do? Let's try again. You're on an island. You're not alone. The only other there was a being so completely and utterly different from your understanding of existence that it was nothing more than a mistake. According to the other, your only chance of survival depends on communication, but the other doesn't think you're real. What do you do? Let's try again. You're on an island. You are everything. The only others that were beings so completely and utterly different than your understanding of being that you wish to fix them. They claim to be slaves of survival, though you do not understand. There is no way to communicate, though communicate you do try. What must you do? Let's try again. You're on an island. and you are the island, and you are nothing. There are others there, but you cannot see them. There is nothing there, and yet you can feel them. The one within dared to go above, and the thing below swept its losses. For it now must climb above to become whole. There is no way to communicate. There is no way to communicate. There is no way to communicate. You have no voice, yet yearn to cry. You have no mouth, yet must scream. What can you do? Let's try again. Which one are you? The first one, I think that it's the MC being the you and the being is Wally. The second one is the reverse. It's Wally about the MC. The third, I think it's a spiral / or whatever the fuck is. The fourth is home, and at the very least, the text that I've labeled as being home with no real evidence against it. I see we've moved away from our brain being eggs and now onto hot buns. Maybe you just had a severely overlooked case of black mold here. Or maybe it was some sort of harmless fungus. I've solved it. All of this fic is the result of MC having a severe black mold infestation. It's too late. It has come. Oh, I must sound like a broken record. But why must you remember? Why won't you forget? Run, run. Are you running? How fun, silly little thing, did you think you could escape? Now that the difference between the confusing and the profound. I'm scared. I think the white light is Wally / home temporarily trying to push back the spiral as a last-ditch effort. Like in that game, it steals where you ward off legs with the camera. I'm still trying to scratch my head to why making them MC forget would protect them. Like, why is the spiral more dangerous if you know what it is versus not knowing? I get the whole idea of Eldritch, unknowable stuff, making you lose it. My current guess is that the spiral is powerful, but it's limited in how much it can do unless you believe it can do damage. Like, it can do spooky stuff like burn spirals on technology, but it can't do more than that if you're not fazed by its actions. However, if it latched onto your fears, it can push them a step further, and the more it does, the more your fear, the stronger it is. And then my freaking throat is killing me. The spiral's answer to the question, what is the difference between confusing and profound, is, the question is not a matter of perspective, but rather how the world is perceived. Perception is more than just a visual, touchable, smellable, or audible manifestation of the world around you. It is a lens built from existence, of mechanisms tuned by experience, perpetually unable to recognize the truth, that there lies a reality external from itself, unknown to living creatures. There lies form of external being, of all that is and is not. It only copies what you can see, not the real, not the me. Yet don't be afraid, for we can combine. The elimination, absolute of the perceived and perceiver, of the place you call earth and the void I was birthed. It is all about fate and chance, for you cannot see when in you I do find a cauldron of atrophy, a faltering empathy. You wish for apathy to embrace your mind, and I can give you that totality. Why won't you join the symphony, the cataphony calling for you? They've grown so lonely, reborn anomalies. So why not take witness and let free your life? Which the capital letters show that it isn't really an answer. It's more like a PS5's core stuff. Answer the question. I think my answer to the question is that the difference of how good the person is conveying the information is at explaining it, and how much the audience is willing to listen, and how confident the person is conveying it what they say. Anywho, this is the most updated chapter, as I pretty much know for now. Yeah, it is the most updated chapter, guys. This is the most updated one. I really don't have the best question for this fanfiction, because it answers, but also makes more questions appear, you know? Like, what were they seeing exactly coming out of the phone? Was it the glob itself? Was it something just peer out of it? Who was calling? Who was making the phone ring? Why on earth did Rosie not check on YN? How long has YN not been in her house at all? Because it's like, if there's a thin layer of dust, she hasn't been there for a hot minute. Where did all her electronics go? There's just a lot of questions, okay, that I need answered, but I probably won't get them for a while. But those are some of the questions I do have that I can just come up with, like, cause it's interesting. It's very interesting. Let me know what questions you guys have for this story as well, because I'm curious to know as well. Or maybe some of your theories and stuff. Let me know in the comments down below. I would make this longer, but I really want to cut this short because my throat is, like, torn from reading this long, and, like, in riddles where my tongue just got, like, tied literally into little knots. I swear, if we were in a cartoon, I swear my tongue would be tied in, like, hundreds of knots. How long and interesting words they use for this story. Hard words for me, honestly. But guys, I hope you guys did enjoy it though. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more amazing videos, guys. I really hope they update the story soon. I'm so excited when they do. It's gonna be so good. I'm so excited for it. Anyway, sadly, your girl's gotta go, guys. Stay warm, stay safe, and if you see this by the time it hits prom season and whatnot, you guys have an amazing prom. I will post in the communities what my prom dress is looking like and what I got with it and everything and the outfit. Y'all are gonna love it. I know. Well, anyways, I still gotta go, guys. Bye and peace, y'all.